Olá, pessoal. Boa tarde. Aqui quem fala é o Bruno Hoffmann, presidente do Camp. Estamos começando aqui a nossa primeira live, espero de uma série aqui. Estamos honradíssimos de receber aqui a diretora da GSPM, né, que é a escola Graduate School of Political Management lá da George Washington University. E daqui a pouco ela vai entrar aqui. Enquanto isso, eu queria aproveitar aqui o ensejo e, bem, importante, sobre a live em si, ela vai ser em inglês, mas a gente vai legendar ela nos próximos dias e soltar de novo. Com relação ao camp, eu até aproveito aqui para já deixar algumas notícias. Bem, a vaga de diretor de operações do camp está aberta, né? Vocês já devem estar sabendo. Para quem não sabe, clica aí no link do nosso perfil aqui no Instagram, já te leva direto para a vaga. Enfim, a gente está comprometido aí, o camp tem crescido, a gente já tem ganho um bom espaço, né? E a gente está crescendo, então para isso a gente quer realmente trazer uma pessoa para estar num operacional mais forte e a gente ganhar mais espaço. Então essa vaga de diretor de operações, não se... o título talvez aí da vaga talvez deixe alguém um pouco receoso, mas estamos procurando a pessoa certa. Pode vir que a gente vai ter um trabalho enorme para ser feito aí. Eu tenho certeza que quem participar dessa vaga com certeza vai estar junto da gente. Bem, a doutora Lara já entrou aqui, depois eu vou mandar notícias também com relação ao nosso evento com o Senado Federal, dia 23 de julho. Deixa eu trazer a doutora Lara aqui pra gente também. How are you? I'm glad to have you.
Good. How are you guys?
You're great. Yeah, I was just right before you came in, I was just talking a little bit about some of the news of camp and some of the things we've been doing here. We're growing, so we're currently hiring a director of operations to help us on the day-to-day. So we'll be growing. But I'll talk about camp in a little bit. First, I want to, hey guys, we're having amazing Dr. Lara Brown with us.
Oh.
She's been with GSPM for what, 7 years now?
7 years. It's hard to believe. I'm aging as we speak.
We all are, I guess, but you look great. So also real quick about her, she's a political scientist with an amazing PhD from University of California. She has authored many books, has served at the U.S. Department of Education during Bill Clinton administration, policy and public affairs consultant in Silicon Valley and Los Angeles, and I mean, I could go on. Those were the things that I got most interested about, so it's an amazing experience. We'll talk also about her new book that is coming today, but I think our viewers are really interested in hearing more about GSPM. I mean, when I went to GSPM, I have never heard of this school here in Brazil before. But I'm sure that we've had enough alumni people here that now it's definitely is the biggest name. But I'm sure people want to hear more about it.
Yeah, I mean, so Bruno, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for hosting this. It's wonderful that we have alumni in Brazil. We actually have a current student who is from Brazil, and she's doing our political management program right now. Thanks to the support of Mauricio Mora, another one of our Brazilian alums. So I just have to say, it's kind of amazing, I think, that we do have these connections all throughout both North and South America and Central America as well. I mean, our students are really incredible. So maybe a little bit about what GSPM is. I always like to think of us as a school that does MBAs for politics. So I think most people who are interested in the political world really kind of get engaged with it, and they learn by doing. But not everything that you learn by doing you want to do. I mean, I think too often when you learn by doing, that also means that if you fail, there are very real consequences. And the great news about going to school at GSPM is that you can learn some of the things to do, and you have a, if you will, a safe place to fail and try out things and experiment things with things that you might not do in the real world. I also, as I said, tend to think of it like MBA, in that, you know, if you wanted to work in the world of business, you wouldn't necessarily get a degree in economics. You would actually go get a master's of business administration, so you could learn how to do the work that is involved in business, not do what it takes to learn how to study business, which is what economists do. And political scientists like me, we study politics. You know, I happen to be somebody who did politics, but I also have spent a great deal of time studying politics. And so for those individuals who really want to do this work, who want to be communications directors, who want to be campaign managers, who want to be digital directors and development directors, who want to advocate on behalf of issues before legislatures and administrations, you come to our school to learn how to do that in effective, strategic ways. And that's what we teach, and we've done it for more than 30 years now. We have about 5,000 alumni around the world, and many of them are in fact still working in Washington, D.C., kind of moving and shaking this world as much as events are rocking it at its core.
Yeah, that's true. So about the school itself, so what besides the masters that you can do in DC by the White House, is there the online program also? There is seminars?
So we actually have 3 of our programs fully online. There is a Master's of Political Management that is online and is essentially the equivalent of the face-to-face Master's in Political Management that is on campus. Those 2 programs operate in English. The Strategic Public Relations program also exists fully online, but it too has a face-to-face counterpart, and both of those operate in English. We, beyond that, have a fully online Spanish language program that teaches campaigns and political management, but it's done all in Spanish, all online.
Right.
No Portuguese yet. But,
not yet. We'll work on it.
But who knows? Maybe if we have enough alums, we'll get.
Exactly. Yeah, we are trying to create this demand. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I was there at GSPM 2006 until 2009, 2008, 9. It was such an amazing experience. You know, the professors, like I even brought here. For instance, some of the professors like Ron Fouchot. Back in the days, that like, wow, that looks like the Bible of it. And then you look the face, you look the picture, and then you look at him, he's right there, like he's the author, right? The same thing, you go back home, you're watching CNN, the political commentator is the professor that you just had class with.
Right.
It's such a vivid, and of course the network, the students, as you mentioned, they're so amazing. I have people doing so much great things around the world. So that's definitely a big thing. It's amazing, and it completely changed my career. I would definitely not be doing what I'm doing right now without GSPM. And I must even say that CAMP, the Associative Club of Political Marketing Professionals here in Brazil, probably maybe wouldn't exist as well, I would say, because now we have approximately 60 consultants, but it's really hard for us to get in. We are very, there's a lot of mandatory things that people have to go through, and recommendation and like time of experience, etc., for you to get into the club. So we're small because of the quality of it. But at least roughly a third of them have a close relationship with GSPM.
Yeah.
Either through a master's or like just the seminars. Like some of them are like always going to the seminars. So it's amazing. And then with camp itself, we've been, it's young. It's only 2 years, 3 now. But we've been doing seminars, we've been doing coaching, we've been doing really important relationship with, for instance, we're producing events with the Federal Senate. So before, you wouldn't see political consultants who are, just like in the US, are marginalized with lobbying and other professionals, professions. But here we are actually sitting down with the people that are managing candidates, they're managing the whole political atmosphere, let's say, in Brazil. So we're sitting at the same table as all these amazing organizations that are vital for democracy.
Well, and I will tell you, I just personally believe that politics has reached a point in time between globalization and the technological advancements that it's really not a good idea to just be running sort of a campaign out of your backyard with sort of your best instincts. The truth of the matter is there are a lot of complicated aspects of a campaign now, whether it is about sort of the regulatory and reporting requirements, whether it is about engaging with the media or social media. I think that learning to be a professional in this field is about really understanding the principles that underlie democracy and then making sure that sort of you and your colleagues can uphold kind of the best practices within this world. Because there's so many opportunities kind of for, I would call hucksterism and kind of people being, taken for a ride, right? Just because there are so many more opportunities to communicate with people all across all sorts of platforms. And there are a lot of people who are, like I said, trying to make a quick buck. And that doesn't serve democracy at a larger level. And so I think understanding what it means to be an actual professional in this field does take you to a different level.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what CUP is doing. We have a strong code of ethics too. So, I mean, we are definitely changing that in Brazil, and GSPM is part of it. So I'm glad sharing this experience. Okay, so everybody was really interested on the US presidential race. Everybody's really following it. I mean, with the whole, especially coronavirus, it's been hard because there's so many news about it. So there's a flood of news about the disease itself, and but the campaign is still on. There's no intention of changing the dates for the election, right?
So yeah, so in the United States, we actually, our national election date was set by a law in the 1800s. So we essentially moved to the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November in the mid 1800s. And to move the election date from that date, you would actually have to pass a new law. And clearly, given how much discord there is between the House and the Senate and the President, there certainly would not be any agreement over a new law. So we are going forward with Election Day. The interesting part about that is that according to even a Supreme Court ruling yesterday that came out, the states are the ones who are really in charge of managing that process. So what that means is that each state has its own process and timeline, typically for registering to vote, whether you have to register by party or not, when, say, a candidate would have to be on the ballot. Like we can actually talk about Kanye West. Yes. I mean, he's basically already missed all of the ballot deadlines or will within the next week. And so he would not in any way, shape, or form, even if he spent gazillions of dollars, be able to win because he would not be able to garner the electoral votes that he needed to to have a successful campaign. So there are a lot of rules and regulations in the United States. Almost all of those happen at the state level. Mm-hmm. And the interesting part about that is we do have a lot of states right now who are trying to figure out how to do mail-in ballots as opposed to standing in line when you actually cast a ballot at a polling place. 34 states and the District of Columbia had absentee ballot provisions in place prior to COVID. And there have been a handful more that are trying to figure out how to make that option available to other, their essentially constituents.
Yeah, no, it's definitely amazing. And one thing that I really think that they should change is at least making it a federal holiday, right? So it's just.
So here's what's really interesting. I actually argue that it shouldn't be a federal holiday.
Really?
Why? Is because there's no requirement that Americans have to vote. And we already only have, about 50% of those who are eligible who vote. Some presidential elections, it's gone up as high as 60%. But we don't have, a huge number of people who actually do vote, given our population. And my biggest fear is that if you make it a holiday, Americans are going to decide that they need a 4-day weekend. So they're going to take off on Friday night, they'll take off Saturday, Sunday, they'll take off Monday, and they'll be gone on Tuesday. And then I actually am worried fewer people would decide to vote because they don't even have to go to work.
Yeah. In Brazil, it's a federal system. It's Sunday, so you have no excuse. And we actually postponed. We just postponed for 6 weeks our election day this year. We're gonna have mayors and city council all over the country elections this year. So that's interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the polling. What's happening there? It seems like that Biden has some sort of, he's comfortably ahead, but then people are saying, well, Hillary was comfortably ahead 4 years ago, and 99% of the analysts said that it was good to go. And
so one of the things that's important to realize is that 2020 is a very different election from 2016. And by that, what I mean is that in the United States, we really have two different kinds of presidential elections. We have what we can comfortably call incumbent re-elections, which is what 2020 is. There's an incumbent on the ballot. He is running for re-election. Sometimes that incumbent is liked, sometimes they are not. But the election itself kind of plays out as a referendum around, do you think this person deserves 4 more years or not? Right. 2016 was the opposite of that. It is what we call an open seat election. And it means that there is no incumbent standing. And while Hillary Clinton was the Democratic nominee, and you could think of her as the heir apparent to Barack Obama, the truth of the matter is when you look at American political elections, it's almost always the case for all of our history that essentially a party wins 2 terms in office and then loses the 3rd. That is very, very common. So we have had, moments like Franklin Roosevelt, who actually won 4 elections in a row, but that is not typical. And since we actually put in place the term limit rules in basically after Harry Truman's presidency, we have seen most presidents who have stood for re-election win re-election, and most open seats go for the challenger seat. So we are in a situation where I would argue when you looked at 2016, the thumb was essentially on the scale for Republicans to win. The problem is many people didn't believe that Donald Trump could pull that off. And when you look at a political science standpoint on this election, most people would say Trump should win re-election. But given how poorly Trump's numbers are at both the approval level and the horse race level, his likelihood of re-election is now actually very poor. And most of the models, like there's a model on the Economist web page that you can take a look at, shows right now that Biden is 90% likely to win the election. And it was never anywhere near that close for Hillary Clinton.
Right, right. Can you actually talk a little bit about Joe Biden's strategy right before Super Tuesday? Because I think that it was such an amazing party move, or I don't know what triggered this whole, but it completely changed. That's when he became a sudden front runner.
Yeah, so this is where I will tell you, I actually wrote a blog on this in early February that said Bernie Sanders is going to have a very hard time in South Carolina, and Super Tuesday does not set up well for him. And this really just has to do with how different the demographics are in each one of the states that holds their elections. Iowa and New Hampshire are about 99% white. It's also true that they have a large number of blue collar, sort of non-college educated voters. And it's also true that in those states, both New Hampshire and Iowa, which tend to lean at the national level Republican, the Democrats there tend to be more progressive. So one of the things that is very interesting is that it's not all that unusual to get a progressive candidate out of Iowa, and to get essentially, if you will, a maverick candidate out of New Hampshire. That's pretty normal. It's also the case that Joe Biden had strength among African American voters that neither Elizabeth Warren nor Bernie Sanders nor Pete Buttigieg had. So when the election, the nomination race moved south, where the majority of the Democratic electorate in those southern states is African American, because when you think about the state kind of in the general election sense, so like a state like South Carolina, if I recall correctly, about 40% of the population there is African American. But guess what? That 40% of the population is almost all Democratic. So the Democratic electorate, which is who the primary really among, is hugely based around having sort of the candidate that the African American constituency wants the most. Mm-hmm. And if you look at who essentially the rest of the voters are in South Carolina, most of them are white, and most of them actually align with the Republican Party. So they were voting for Trump. So they weren't even voting, right, in this election where Biden came out ahead and then went on to win Super Tuesday in a big way. It's also, I mean, I'll just say one other quick thing. The other thing that's important to realize about this is that Bernie Sanders, generally speaking, if you look back to 2016, did much worse in primaries than he did in caucuses. That was also the case if you go back to 2008 with regard to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama did much better in the caucus states than in the primary states. And one of the things that is fascinating is that between, say, 2008 and 2020, the Democratic Party got away from caucus states. It started doing fewer and fewer caucus states because it recognized that disenfranchised a number of people because they couldn't show up that evening to stand for 2 to 3 hours to, in fact, cast their vote. So as more states did more primaries, it wasn't surprising to me that Bernie Sanders ended up doing more poorly. So in fact, he did worse against Biden in 2020 than he did against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Some of that had to do with the structure of the race. Some of it had to do with the constituency of voters he attracted. And some of it also just had to do with how many Democrats were also uncomfortable with having Hillary Clinton win the nomination.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was an anti-Hillary vote in 2016.
Right. I also what impressed me the most was the fact that Buttigieg and Klobuchar, how because they left a couple of days before Super Tuesday. They it seemed that definitely played an important role as well for Biden there, right?
It did, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that they knew they had hit their high water mark in New Hampshire and in Iowa, and that they were not likely to replicate that on Super Tuesday. So it made sense for them to bow out so
Right.
that essentially there was more space in the moderate lane, if you will, for Vice President Biden.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So we, in the middle of this whole thing, coronavirus shows up,
Yes.
and then the candidates had no clue what to do. Right? They stopped their. If that's, but that was my feeling, that they first, of course, for safety reasons, they stopped all the events. But then, especially Biden, I think it took him a while to actually start using social media more, or just doing more speeches online and so on, about their strategies. How did you see these strategies figuring out what to do during that transition?
Well, I mean, look, I think that it makes perfect sense to continue to do virtual engagements. And I think, Vice President Biden did that. He wasn't necessarily the center of the conversation, because really, when there's a crisis and a pandemic, and the economy is falling apart, sort of all eyes turn to the presidency. So it made sense that, if you will, the media story really became about the president. I will also say that helped Joe Biden, because it is the case that this president took actions and engaged in rhetoric that was highly questionable on a series of fronts, right? I mean, there were people wondering why he was doing these coronavirus briefings, and then he was making suggestions that people, should take unproven drugs and perhaps somehow could disinfect their insides, with bleach, right? These things only made his leadership appear more erratic and more problematic. And given that this 2020 election is an incumbent referendum, right? The primary question before everybody is, should this person have another 4 years or not? It actually helped Biden. And I would argue that the more he can sort of not engage, probably the better off he is, because the more this election stays focused on President Trump, the more people will say, I don't approve of what he's doing. All of the polling shows people don't approve of what he's doing. Since really it's almost been his entire presidency that at least 52% of Americans have disapproved of the job that this president's doing.
Right.
So when the majority is disapproving of the incumbent, right, why get in the way? You might as well just let the incumbent keep demonstrating to the public that they're not capable of leading.
Right. Yeah. I've seen international polling that shows all the leaders of the world how they're doing regarding to the handle of the crisis, and there's only two that were going down during Trump and Bolsonaro. So we know why. Yeah.
The president has tested positive, right, for COVID.
Right. Yeah, he just did. Yeah. So
we'll see how that goes. I mean, what's interesting about that is Boris Johnson, also had his bout with COVID, and he became, I would argue, a much more thoughtful, scientific sort of proponent after his bout with it and after his recovery. So I do think it's going to be fascinating to see how Bolsonaro, first of all, whether or not he gets sick, and then really how he responds after that.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's true. So another big subject that we've seen that, as far as I've seen, it was the biggest manifestations, protests in history, probably, in
Yes.
number of people. So George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, how that is playing out right now?
Well, I think it's very important. I mean, I think there is a reality all over the world. I don't think that this is just sort of singularly related to the United States. All over the world that, Black people have been discriminated against. I think that that is real, and it has happened kind of in every country and at every institution. And I do think the fascinating part about, all of the videos we have now, right? The cameras and the cell phone videos, is that we're actually able to see this happening in kind of more mundane interactions, right? There was this woman in Central Park, right, who, called the police because an African-American man asked her to put her dog on a leash, right? And so not even the worst things like George Floyd's death, but really mundane things where you just see the discrimination is so evident. And I think most people who have a conscience have a sense that this is just wrong. It's just not right. It shouldn't be this way. If we really do believe that all of us are created equal. So I think, one of the things that's fascinating is these protests have encouraged, so many people to get out in the streets, which is dangerous during a pandemic, to try to say we need to change things. We really need to change things. And we need to not just give it lip service this time, but we need to change things. Right. So I would argue that the protesters, in a lot of ways, have won, right? They have won. They have actually gained the majority support from, the people that they need to make things change. What has been frustrating to me is that it seems as though the conversation has now shifted really to focusing around monuments. And yes, it is true that symbols matter and statues matter, and we should certainly do all that we can to remove Confederate statues in the United States, because anyone who fought for the Confederacy was in fact engaged in a treasonous act against the United States of America, against the Union, and they were defending slavery. So it makes sense to me that those Confederate statues and monuments should come down. But to not have them sort of go through a political process to bring them down, I think is actually undermining their cause. And it's giving President Trump and sort of the opponents of social justice reforms kind of a leg to stand on, and they really shouldn't have one, to be honest.
Right, yeah. And it's interesting to see also how this is playing, especially in Joe Biden's case, for his VP choice. There's a lot of articles on because of the pressure on this, he must be a black female, and what it wonders me is like, it looks like that because Joe Biden, I've seen, so as far as I've known with Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they were the ones that kind of more the progressive ones that would bring more of the younger crowd vote. It seems like that maybe he'll feel the pressure to pick one, but maybe not necessarily is going to be the one that is going to truly help him to be elected. It's interesting.
Well, I mean, what I do think is real is that, Vice President Biden has said he will choose a woman. Right. I do think that that's important. I also think it is important for him to choose a woman of color, and if it were up to me, I would tell him an African-American woman. Right. And I say that partly because when you look at the Democratic Party is mostly comprised of women and people of color. So the idea that you would have another ticket, say with two white men, just doesn't make a lot of sense. I would also say that given how important African Americans were to Joe Biden winning the nomination and how important they would be to him winning the presidency, because African American turnout did kind of wane in 2016. I would think that he would want to choose an African American woman for his vice president.
Right, yeah. Well, I know you have an upcoming new book coming, and can you tell us a little bit more and when it's going to be available for us?
Sure. So I do. I have a book coming out called Amateur Hour, and it is on presidential character and the question of leadership. And what it really focuses on is that, character matters, right? It matters in terms of leadership. The book itself will be out later this month, and it pretty much spans the history of Jimmy Carter through the present. So it makes an argument that in the wake of Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon's presidencies, both of those two individuals were very experienced political insiders. And the United States was incredibly disillusioned and angry with the choices they made. So Lyndon Johnson obviously got us into sort of the thick of things in Vietnam. And there were, more than 50,000 deaths over the course of that war's history. Americans were devastated, so much so that, right, in 1968, he chose not to run for re-election, even after he had been elected in a landslide in 1964. And then Richard Nixon came into office, and he too won a landslide in 1972. But by 1974, he was resigning from office after the Watergate scandal was revealed. And it was shown that he had misused the presidency and really crossed into several illegal actions. So both of those two individuals really brought down the trust of the American people in the presidency itself. And ever since that time, we have been electing people who have claimed to be outsiders. They have, said, I'm outside Washington. I can come and change Washington. I can make it better. And my book really argues that, well, actually, you really can't. It's very difficult if you don't know how something works to fix it. And that really we need to rethink what it means to be an amateur. It's also the case that over time, this outsider really started with the idea of it being a governor, right? Jimmy Carter had been governor of Georgia. Ronald Reagan had been governor of California. Bill Clinton had been governor of Arkansas. But in the last few elections, it has really been about outside of politics altogether. And oh, by the way, maybe a celebrity of some sort. So, even though there's a lot to sort of commend about both George W. Bush and Barack Obama, the truth of the matter is both of them were incredibly inexperienced amateurs who just had a lot of celebrity within each of their respective parties. I mean, George W. Bush had only been governor for 6 years when he became president of the United States. And Barack Obama had only served in the Senate for 4 years before he became president of the United States. And then, of course, you get to Trump, right? President Trump had 0 elective office experience and has spent most of his life as a television celebrity, even more so than a real estate mogul, because a lot of his money has been made from kind of branding deals and giving his name away, not necessarily building buildings anymore.
Right.
So I just think it's obviously really important to understand that that's where kind of things are and how things have changed. And I think it's important to realize that if we want to get back to having functioning government, we need to have people who know what they're doing leading it.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's an amazing subject. I actually every Wednesday morning, every other Wednesday morning, we have at camp a call between all the members. And actually we had one this morning, and we were just talking about the fact that, for instance, with social media, with all the way that people are dealing with politics, it seems that we're so far away from the old good speeches of those really important politicians that would tell us and preach about the importance of it and the democracy. And nowadays they're just fighting on social media, just trying to get more celebrity numbers on social media in order to persuade voters or try to. So it's intriguing. You know?
Well, and I the way I always think about it is this, you know, to a large degree, let's say you're on an airplane, you're a passenger on an airplane, and your airplane hits turbulence, and obviously, you know, things get a little rocky and a little scary. And the pilot tries to steer you through. What we've essentially done is said it was the pilot's fault that we hit turbulence.
Right.
So I know, let's just get a passenger to fly the plane. And then we throw a passenger in the pilot's seat. And then what? The plane loses altitude. And then we get even more upset because the plane's lost altitude. And we're like, I know, let's find another passenger.
Exactly.
And we keep swapping out passengers instead of finding pilots. And we really need some pilots. There's a whole character dimension to this too, which I think is important. And it's a lot of what my book talks about, which is that really good leaders, they may be, quote, authentic in terms of being who they are and presenting who they are, but they also are not tone deaf to what's happening in the world. And so really good leaders not only know how to be authentic to their own character, but they know how to portray sort of a role, right? That there are times where you have to step up to the role. You have to find compassion. You have to look for strength. You have to ask questions. So there are times where just who you are isn't going to even be enough. You have to be more than who you are. And really good politicians knew how to do that. They knew how to step into those roles and, if you will, act the part, even if they didn't know the part. And the part of the problem that we have in today's world is we keep prizing authenticity above everything. And that means that somehow we're actually okay with people being authentically awful or authentically incompetent, because we'd rather have them be that than what, at some level, be portraying something that's not true to themselves.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, we see a lot of that in the Brazilian politics as well. The non-politician kind of candidate has been growing a lot, and it's just bad for democracy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I just think what we need to do is we need to have more honest conversations with people about how difficult democracy is, how if we really want to hear from a lot of people, then it means we have to tolerate kind of a lot of discord and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of messiness. And a really good leader helps to kind of navigate a process by which, you know, most people feel heard, and yet there are still solutions and pathways forward. So you can't just have somebody who really only cares about their brand. Like, that's just not. And the fact that we have decided that all of politics should just be branding tells me that we're missing kind of what all of the great philosophers, you know, from Aristotle on down really knew, which is that politics is a high art, and it is something that you dedicate your life to. And, you know, becoming a leader is not the business of somebody who just wants to be an interloper and turn a quick buck.
Right, right. That's true. Well, it's amazing. Some of our members really interested to know if GSPM is going to organize one of those election events where you have seminars throughout even if it's online this year, unfortunately, because it's always great,
Yeah, so I'll tell you right now, we are in the process of planning a 4-webinar election series where there will be different guests for each one of the webinars. One will happen during the Democratic Convention. I think it's August 3rd, like it's in mid-August. Another one will happen during the Republican Convention, which is a little later in August. And then we will have a panel of people dissecting the presidential debate in a webinar in the lunch hour following the presidential debate night. And then we'll do the same thing following the vice presidential debate in October. So we'll have basically a 4-webinar election series. Everybody is welcome to join. We're also going to be doing a GSPM webinar on August 11th, where our faculty members are going to kind of come together. I'm moderating that conversation, but Professor Michael Cornfield, Professor Todd Bell, Professor Casey Burgett, and our data scientist, Megan O'Neill, everyone's going to come together and talk about what we've seen in the polling that GSPM has done and in our social media analytics. And we're going to release a presidential forecasting model as well, which should tell you how many electoral college votes we anticipate one or the other candidates getting.
Awesome. Well, I'm also looking forward to have more of GSPM here in Brazil. I know that we have to wait the vaccine, but I've heard that if maybe we have a group of students coming to Brazil next year, we can definitely looking forward to that and have events with GSPM here.
We are absolutely hopeful to do that. As you may know, we were planning on doing a residency in Brazil this August. Unfortunately, because of all the travel restrictions and COVID, we're not able to do that. It is still our hope that there will be a vaccine by next August, so August of 2021, and that we will get to go down there and sort of meet with our alums and engage our students, because we do see Brazil as, you know, a massive country and key player in world politics, and we want to make sure that our students are exposed to what's happening in your country as well as the U.S.
Yeah, and we absolutely love to host them. Me, Publio Madruga, Sila Schumann, Mauricio Moura, we were definitely making sure that all the meetings were great, even a little bit of fun, and it was such an amazing time with Natalia there.
Yes. And she says hello, and she's hoping.
Yeah, we love her. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That was absolutely amazing. We'll be in touch. Thanks so much.
It was delightful to chat and so good to, you know, converse across the continents. And I will just say, you know, we're all in for sort of a wild, rocky ride these next 6 months. But
yes.
You know, I always believe, I mean, I deeply believe that good political strategists find opportunities in every circumstance. And so it's important to keep thinking creatively, keep thinking innovatively, and, you know, engage in our systems, because goodness knows politics needs all of us.
Oh, yeah, they do. And they have to understand that they do also.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bruno. Thank you for this. Thanks to CAMP. I certainly hope that, you know, more of our alums and practitioners down in Brazil join you in your efforts to connect them as a profession, because I think that's so important to keep professionalizing this world.
Yes, yes, that's our mission.
So
Thank you
thanks.
so much, Lara.